Hello, hello. This is Chris Jansen. Welcome to the End Evil podcast. The End Evil podcast is dedicated to truth, natural law, freedom, the concepts we all need to recognize and deeply internalize. I was inspired by the book The End of All Evil by Jeremy Locke, and I've been greatly inspired by the work of Mark Passio on whatonearthishappening.com, where I got this shirt from, and I think it's a great thing to check out if you have not. Another person who I've found really inspiring is a gentleman named Brandon Martin. Brandon Martin's here with me today. We were having a great conversation. He and I both did a similar study of the movie Aliens. We both really liked that movie, and it's something we were able to connect with. Hey, welcome. Thanks for coming on the show today, Brandon. Let me see if I can get you on here. Welcome, Brandon. Thanks for coming and joining me on the podcast. I'm so glad to have you here.
Yeah, it's an honor to finally get on your show, Chris. I've been watching you progress throughout the years, and I think what you've been doing is amazing, man. I really love that you were inspired by The End of All Evil. That was one of the first books I read that was recommended by Mark. And, it's just such a powerful little book, obviously. And I mean, it's so small. What is it, like 103 pages or something? It's tiny. And
Yeah, you
people,
can read it a couple hours.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I've read it so many times and I recommend it to people. So it's really cool when you came out with your podcast. I was really inspired because of the title, and I knew exactly what it was inspired from. I was like, oh yeah, that's from Jeremy, obviously. So that's really awesome. So yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here with you, and it was kind of synchronistic, that we were working on the the Aliens movie at the same time, and that's kind of what we're here to talk about today, is to break down the allegory of aliens, or as you called it, the evil within. And I think it was awesome because I was working on an essay, and you had put out that video, and I didn't even know you had put out the video, and my uncle let me know, and I was like, oh, that's cool, and I watched it and I was like, oh, this is what I'm saying too. This is really awesome. So it lined up, synchronistically. So I really love that.
Yeah, and the movies, I find that movies find are kind of like a fun way to deal with some of the subject matter that otherwise is difficult subject matter. Sometimes feels a little bit repetitive, saying the same things over in the same way. And when you look at a movie and use it as an allegory, it offers us this really interesting way to look at a subject or a topic and tie it in with something kind of fun. And I think you and I both really enjoyed it. I got to say, Aliens is like my all-time favorite movie. I know a lot of the lines by heart. I can almost tell someone the whole movie as we're watching it, exactly what's going to happen next. But around that time, what's really interesting is when I was first coming out with my very first presentations and sharing them with the Mark Passio's community, was when I was also really looking into your work, and I was really inspired by the S.E.E.D conference, and I was all planning on going, and then we all got shut down by COVID, and it's weird. Here we are, like 2 years later, and it's like kind of like we just met after we've both been through this whole crazy experience of watching the world go a little deeper into evil. And so, I think it's a really good topic because, like, evil, most people are confused about what the word even means. And so that's, I think, a good place to start. I usually try to do that somewhere in the beginning of the shows, talk about what does evil even mean? What am I talking about here? How can we end it? So I'll let you be the guy. I'd love to hear, your take on what evil means, and is it possible to end it?
Right. Yeah, that's action. I would say the way I would define evil is the destruction of freedom from a sentient or moral agent. So any form of violent action that destroys a being's rights, or removes those rights, or prevents those rights from actually being expressed or manifest into reality. I think evil has been confused with this religious ideology that has to be tied up with the devil or Satan, or these type of archetypal images that we have throughout history, when normally they're all just allegories for a certain psychological behavior, or a physical manifestation of that psychological state of mind, right? So I think it is important for people to understand evil, because they it's so ambiguous for people in their mind. The definition of evil, it could be one thing or another. They think, you know, let's find a good example here. They think maybe it's some like supernatural act. For example, they think it's evil for a storm to come in and destroy their village or something like that. They'll apply this superstitious, supernatural, uh, anthropomorphized act from the storm, like the tornado coming in and destroy their village, and that's evil. That's like an evil event that has taken place. When really it's not. It's not like the storm or nature was intentionally coming in to personally harm you at that moment. So it has to be done through beings with the capacity to understand right and wrong behavior. They have to have the capacity to understand their own conscience, have a conscience, and to understand objective morality. So, like when we see a lion taking down a gazelle, is that evil? No, it's not, because they don't have the discernment or the brain capacity or any other means of living in their position of existence, for them to not do those actions. Without the gazelle, then it would not be able to survive. It can't plant gardens. It can't create technologies that can help it develop better sophisticated means of agriculture or anything like this. So that's not an evil act, but people would look at that as an evil act. So I would say it has to be a human being or a being higher in consciousness or physical manifestation that understands the expressions of liberty being the difference between what rights are and what they are not. And yeah, I mean, I think that's the simplest way of putting it. The
Love it. That's the definition I use every episode, and I really like that you brought up the other aspect too, which I try to bring up. A volcano blows up. You know, that's not evil. That's not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about evil. That's for sure. So we're all on the same page. It's for all intents and purposes things that humans do to one another. It's lying. It's different forms of stealing. It's that's the real law. You know and so that's once we got that out of the way, I think we should just go ahead and dig a little bit into our favorite movie and see how it goes using that as an allegory. My idea when I looked at the movie Aliens was thinking of the alien itself as sort of embodying the evil. And then you think about the aspects of the way the evil gets into other people and it sort of spreads in a way from one person to another. And then once it gets inside somebody, it becomes this thing that comes out and starts messing up other people too. And isn't that the way it works when people lie from one another or steal from one another? It creates this abomination of problems that just keeps growing and growing until someone stops doing the wrong and ends the evil. And so to me it's a pretty good start right there allegorically. And so yeah, I loved looking over. Brandon wrote up a really beautiful his whole allegory breakdown of the occult aspects of this movie, and you can find that on one great work network.com/Brandon Martin, and I'll include the link here so folks can check it out. But once you start us off, like in the beginning of the movie, one of the things you pointed out that I never even noticed was even right in the title, the way aliens displayed, there was some interesting things going on there. You want to start us off there, Brandon?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back just a little bit and talk about the idea of evil within the movie. I think that's a great way of explaining just a basic allegory of this entire movie. It's evil, the seeds of evil being programmed into your subconscious, which then manifest at some level. And usually it starts at a very very young age, maybe even inside of the womb. And that kind of goes along with this allegory of the film, which we'll expand upon. But yeah, the beginning of the movie, the title, I really love what James Cameron did. So this movie came out in 1986. It had like a 7 year work cycle from the last movie. So they had a lot of problems getting this movie together. But once they did actually get moving, James Cameron was hired on to be the script writer, and what he had done is he adapted a script that he had written earlier on, which I didn't talk about in my essay, and I'm going to put it in part two, which will be coming out here in the future weeks. But he adapted a script which was called Mother, and it was interesting because in that script he was talking about aliens on a spaceship with a giant suit of armor, like an exoskeleton armor that would fight these aliens, which we see in the actual movie. But he has such a. I just want to talk about James Cameron for a second because he has such a unique way of exploring the aspects of the darkness within people, and he's really influenced by military logistics. So he originally worked on, let's say, he worked on like Terminator, right? He was the director for Terminator and Terminator 2. So he has all this military understanding. He actually worked when he did Aliens. So they hired him on. The first movie was done by Ridley Scott, and this movie was done by James Cameron. So my point is that he understands military technology and the advancements of technology, and he also understands military tactics and the sophistication that goes in with that. And we see this in the and the way that he directs his movies is very interesting. That's why like Terminator was such a mind-boggling revolutionary movie, because it's talking about transhumanism. It's also talking about the nature of evil in a different way. And he was working on the Terminator movie and Aliens movie pretty much simultaneously, from what I've understood. But yeah, James Cameron, he used to be a model maker, an art director. He came from a very, very low level, and then he really fought his way up into becoming a director. And interesting, what the ironic nature of this is that his script, Mother, this is why I brought that up, relates with the original first movie, because the first movie, the spaceship has the AI, which is called Mother, in it. And I wanted to bring that up because this is a huge symbolic representation of the female aspect. So the whole movie has this emanation of the sacred feminine principle aligning with the sacred masculine principle. So right at the beginning of the movie, we have the title, which is blue in its color and its aura, and the title is Aliens, obviously. And that blue represents sacred feminine. It represents the sacred feminine aspect of ourselves, but it also represents receptiveness. So blue makes you receptive to things. It makes be able to take things in. It can also be a representation of water as well. So it correlates obviously with the water breaking of the mother. But in the eye of the alien, right, of aliens, the letter I actually looks like the womb itself. So it has light emanating out of it, and it's shaped like a womb. And then as the camera pans in and zooms in on that eye, it's like we're being birthed into this universe, right? So it's like it's a metaphor for us coming into this universe. And obviously, the eye can be symbolic of the third eye as well. And it's a photoreceptor, and it dictates and regular circadian cycles. So the light being correlated with that is really important. So there's a lot of symbolism in it, and a lot of people would overlook.
I just thought of Brandon, which is a
What'd you think
trip,
of?
which aliens is a lie. You know, the word
Right,
lies in
right.
there, and I was just joking how we're talking about the evil inside and a lie ends. Just who knows that was there, one of those green language things. Anyway, go ahead.
No, that's great. That's a perfect green language, and that is what we're talking about. So the whole movie has a um, this reference of birthing, right? It has a lot to do with the birth process. It has a lot to do with sexual, to do with sexual repression. It has a lot to do with sexual encounters of rape and things like that. And we'll expand upon that a little bit more. But yeah, I really love that you just brought that up, because I thought about that when I was writing it, and I never did add that into the essay that I wrote. And I was like, yeah, that might be a little too much for people to understand. But for your audience, I'm sure they'll understand it.
Yeah.
Um, so I really liked that, the way that he did the introduction into that because you don't really see that too often. A lot of people would just overlook that that's a womb shape. The eye is. It has light in it. It represents the third eye, but it also represents the connection to the below, as above, so below connection in the bodily autonomy, and anatomy. I mean, and then you're birthing yourself into this new story, right? So you're coming in, and where do you come into? You come into the universe, and that's what we come into in the first, which is we're being birthed into the universe as a masculine principle. We see the ship, right? We see this ship floating through space, and this ship is a phallic shaped ship, and it's named Narcissus, which I'll explain in a moment, which is a male Greek mythological character. And spaceships and rockets and all these things are phallic in their nature. They're all about peeling or launching or lifting. They're all this idea of
Docking.
projection, docking, right? And we see this throughout the movie. Some of it's not intentionally sexual, but it is psychologically there, the symbolism there. So when a ship docks with another ship, you have a port that it hooks up to, and that port represents the sacred feminine, right? So, and then you have people, the seamen, people inside the ship go from one place to another, obviously. So it's very alchemical, and it's very, I mean, some could say it's very Freudian. Definitely you could have some Freudian psychology being manifested there, you know. So I think that's a really good spot to start off with. Another thing I would like to say is that I study cinema a lot. I study cinema language and cinema technique, right, and cinema expression. So cinema language is the idea of being able to express and convey ideas, and invoke certain emotions within from the symbolism and from the ideas and from the scenes in the movie. So how can you get that done, right? How can you subliminally and subtly bring out some emotions from an individual with the camera work, with the sound, with the attires, the aesthetics, with all the visual concepts of the story. And so the whole movie really has a great score behind it. It has this military drum beat that comes in, when you got the yeah, yeah. I really love it. Amazing. It's James
Another
Cameron
day
for
on the
you.
farm.
Right, right. So if you think about
Day
like
in the Marines
Terminator,
like a day on the farm.
yeah, yeah, I love the quotes in the
Sergeant.
movie.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're right though. He did a good job with that whole military thing and bringing that feeling. It felt pretty real, especially in the beginning. What I'm curious about though, in the first scene, when they're cutting through into the ship that
mm.
that Sigourney Weaver's on, is that part of the extended cut, or was that in the original version when they show the scavengers discovering her ship floating in space? Was that in both versions?
Yeah, I do believe it was
I'm a
in
little
both
confused about that.
versions. Yeah, I'm pretty sure
Because
it
just
was in
recently
both
I watched
versions.
I bought the extended one, and I'm like, was that in the one I always watch? I kind of didn't remember the beginning so well. But that's,
Yeah, I had
right there in the beginning is some pretty symbolic thing as they're coming into that ship, right?
absolutely theatrical version for a while, so I can't say that for sure, but I do vaguely remember that that was of it. I know that they had to find her. They find her and awaken her out of the coffin. So yeah, the cutting of the door and opening the ship, because a ship can also, like I said, it's masculine, but it also can represent a container which holds something within it. So it'd be feminine. The yin and the yang have a little bit of both within each other, right? So the masculine can be it's not all 100% masculine. There's a little bit of femininity there as well, right? So we have to understand that the ship can represent a female body, and then it kind of reminded me of a C-section. I don't think that's intentional, but that was what I pulled out of it, was like somebody cutting a stomach and then pulling out the individual. So Sigourney Weaver, whose name is Ellen Ripley, which is interesting because the name is L, so you're in L, right? So that's L means God, And so she's sleeping in this ship. She's been in a hyperbolic, like deep sleep for 57 years, I believe. And the ship has all the it's all frozen because it's been cold, and there's all the it looks like space in a way from the glycering effect of all the ice particles everywhere on the surfaces of everything. So it kind of has this mirroring effect between the stars in space and then within the ship as well. And she's sleeping in this coffin. And in the movie later on, which I'm sure you're familiar with, they call her Sleeping Beauty, or they call her Snow White, is what they call her. And that's a reference to Sleeping Beauty. And then if you look up Sleeping Beauty, you'll find out that that's inspired by the Greek mythological tale of Narcissus and his competition with Nemesis. And so it's really interesting because she's Sleeping Beauty, she's in the glass coffin, she has to be awakened by a masculine figure at some point. It's men who come in there, so I find that kind of interesting, and that's definitely intentionally done. Like even with the reference of Snow White, it's like that's not
and
intentional.
and
It's
that
super
that
intentional.
cutting torch tool that was used to make its way into her, it's kind of floating its way, and it definitely definitely looks like a penis. I'm not even going to say phallic. That thing, I think it's hard to
Yeah,
believe that wasn't purposeful.
right, yeah, absolutely. So it's wild, when you start opening your mind and you start seeing these things. So yeah, the scavengers walk in, right? They're like in these, they look like chemical protection suits, like you're going into a they're space suits obviously, but they kind of look like they're biohazard suits in a way. And this is most likely because the movie was done like on a $1 budget, which was really really small. Because James Cameron, he was fighting to get this movie done, and Fox didn't want to give him 35 million. They got settled for 15, and which was actually better because he got better special effects, which were more realistic in the film. And I'll talk about that in a bit. But they come in and they got the symbol of power, right? It's a power symbol, which we often find on their vests, and it has
Right
the
there.
circle, right, yep, and it has the circle at the top, the crescent at the top, with the phallic in the middle. So it represents the sacred feminine womb, and that's our symbol. You find it on all kinds of devices, your electronic devices. When you look at them, it's all over the place. But I felt that was kind of interesting when I found that. So you'll definitely hear a lot about this symbolism of sacred masculine and sacred feminine going on within this movie, and so there's very very deep, profound symbolism in James Cameron's work. Obviously, you look at Terminator, it's mind-boggling to me. Like you said earlier, this is one of your favorite movies. This was one of my favorite movies as a kid too. I loved it, and I thought back and I was like, why did I love this one so much? And I feel because of the military approach to it, it really gave me a sense of, and it's kind of a sense of empowerment for a male, because the first movie scared the crap out of me. All right, the first movie was terrifying to me. I could barely hand watching it. But the second movie, I was like, oh yeah, these Marines are marching in with these guns, and we're taking out, and it's all action, but it's still scary in a way, but you feel more empowered. So I think that's one of the reasons why I was more attracted to this movie as a child, because I was into this masculine principle of sacred self-defense, the sacred masculine principle of self-defense. So I think that's interesting. I'm not sure
I
why you were
think I
attracted
think
to it.
for me that powerful woman archetype really stuck
Mm,
out, and when I started talking about this movie, that's what really pops out. And now that you say it, Terminator's the same thing, where the lead role is this super powerful woman that
absolutely.
she's making most of the men in the movie look pretty cowardly compared to her, because she's so brave. And
Right.
Sigourney Weaver, I found myself, one of the first women I really kind of found myself being attracted to as a young man. Like, I want a woman like that. That chick's tough,
Me
She
too.
threw the alien right out of the airlock, man.
Yeah.
You
No, I
know,
was super, super attracted to Sigourney Weaver as a kid. And I
yeah,
even, I would look for females that would, similar archetype as Sigourney Weaver, because she's a super strong, feminine example of empowered female in society. She's realistic. And that's something we can talk about real quick is like, you know, we see all these feminist movies or feminist characters lead roles in all these movies nowadays, and a lot of them are not believable to me. You know, like they're not really believable, and I think they need to take a tip from this movie specifically, or maybe Terminator, you know, because they've lost out on the realism that really attracts men. You know, it's weird because it's a movie, it's an action movie with a female lead. Obviously, I've never heard one man ever complain about it. They've always loved it, right? They've always loved aliens. They've always loved even Alien. You know, they've always loved Sigourney Weaver in that position. It's because of the way that the story of her character develops and the way that she is a authentic female archetype. You know, she's a good role model, right? Don't mind dogs; they're out there playing around. So,
They like Sigourney too.
yeah, probably. Yeah, so she's a great. She's. Let me read some stuff that I wrote down here about her. Um, let's see here. I got a couple things here. She has authentic leadership. So in the movie, we see her taking charge. We see her kind of. We have the Marines in the movie that come in, right? And a lot of them are really just idiots, right? The leader Gordon is an absolute idiot, right? He's the head commander dude, and he's just completely
Gorman.
incompetent. Yeah, Gorman. Yeah, that's his name, Gorman. He's absolutely incompetent, right? So she knows how to take leadership when it's required. You know, she knows how to step up into that position when it's necessary in those times of desperation. You know, another thing I really liked about it is that she lives in the real. You know, she lives in realism. She's not like trying to sugarcoat everything. She's not trying to everybody else. She's not trying to take the victim mentality. This is what's happening. We need to deal with it right now, you know? And you see that dialogue between her and Hudson take place later in the movie where he's, you know, going nuts and complaining about like, what are we going to do? I can't remember the line. He's freaking out. And, you know, she puts him in his
What
place,
are we
right?
gonna do now?
Yeah. 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 She puts him his place because she's in the real,
Right,
right?
right.
Solutions too. Like she
He said, "We're
steps
gonna
up
get up on the ship and we're gonna nuke the whole thing from space." Yeah,
right.
that's what
Absolutely.
we should do. What she said. Nuke it all from space.
Yeah. Right. So it's so funny, you know. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
don't find that in modern movies. Oh, sorry about my camera there. I
That's
probably dropped
okay.
that for a second, but yeah, you know, we don't
Well,
find that
and
in
they're
modern
he's
movies.
doing
Most of
that.
the
He's it almost seems purposeful because there's this comparison between, like you're saying, the inauthentic males. You got Gorman, the ineffective leader who doesn't have experience and he's not a good leader. He's everything a good leader shouldn't be. He's dishonest. And then you got even worse dishonesty level with Burke, you know, the guy she meets when she first comes out of her sleep. And he's like the typical yes man, the corporate man, the man who's wearing the tie, the man who sold his soul to the man, right? And he's the
yeah,
yes man. And so he's like the most terrible, despicable kind of man who acts like he's a nice guy, but really he's a total coward and he's a shit. And in the end, you see him die because of his own cowardice. And you know, it's almost like the director's doing this on purpose to show you this, you know, this crazy difference between what is a real man and what is a real woman. You know, what is a real female symbol that we want to appreciate. And it's kind of like that same underdog thing that we all appreciate. We like seeing an underdog come from the bottom and get to the top. And in our society, typically females have been put down in so many ways. I think it was good for a lot of us to see this tough, strong female. But I wanted to go back to the beginning a little bit because something you were saying got me kind of excited about this idea of awakening. Like one of my other all-time favorite movies is The Matrix. You know,
hmm
obviously why, right? But you have this theme of this awakening process, right? And we talk about this in our podcasts and in the, becoming an initiate, in learning about the occult. There's this awakening process. The problems we have in the world, awakening to the problems in the world. In the beginning of Aliens, it's like this dream within a dream situation where you got first, Ripley's waking up on the ship where she stayed last time, and then she's waking up in the hospital from waking up in the ship, and then you realize she's inside of a dream waking up from a dream inside of the dream inside of the, you know, and it's like this triple, almost a triple, quadruple dream inside of a dream type situation. And that's very symbolic and very much a part of the experience we have as truth speakers and as people that come to realize um, the tenets or the deeper truths about reality, such as natural law or hermetics, where we really start to see through the facade into this other story. And then beyond that, there's another layer. So, what does that strike within you?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. It's very astute of you to bring out and bring up. It's an unfolding process, right? So we're always constantly unfolding the layers of understanding and awakening. And that's why I really do like that in all three movies, you know, Alien, Aliens, and Alien 3, you have her awakening at each movie at the beginning, and you have that in The Matrix, and you have that in other movies as well, right? So it is that unfolding process. It's like a fractal unfolding nature of understanding the mysteries of yourself and home in which you operate in. And I really like the way you explained that, because it is a dream within a dream, right? And it gives us the viewer, when we first, watch this, getting identified with Ripley. And if you watch the other movie, you're like, oh yeah, I know who this character is. She's going to be the main character through this. And then we get this kind of subverting of our expectation, because when she wakes up in the hospital, she has the alien in her dream impregnated in her, and it starts to puncture out, and she freaks out, and she goes through the immense trauma within her dream. It's this nightmare, but we as viewers don't know that. At first, we think this is actually going on. When you first watched it, you're like, oh man, she's going to die right at the beginning of the film. So it's a way for the director to subvert actions, and then you realize we're actually in a dream. So it's kind of interesting, especially when you apply that to your own consciousness, about how when you start to unravel your inner traumas, right, and you realize that all these traumas you have are actually from the past, most of them, like the ones that have been pushed down into your subconscious. And most of them, I'm not talking about the current system of government oppressing you now, but I'm talking about like childhood traumas, or parental issues, or abandonment issues, or things like this. And you realize that none of that is actually happening to you right now. Those things are not happening to you right now, but you can almost experience it like it is happening to you right now, because of how our minds work. You can bring up the emotions almost instantly, like it's happening to you right now. So that's a big thing. I think that's kind of pointing at what you were talking about, with the unfolding, but within the self. You unfold within yourself as well as in the external world. So I think that's a really interesting thing. I think my camera froze again.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe when I do a little bit of editing, I can put a couple clips of pictures from the movies and stuff. That alien coming out of the stomach. It's like, it's so visceral. It sticks in your mind so much, right? And you pointed out in that first scene, there's this really interesting thing where, generally, like in the first movie, and when alien comes out of the chest, it pretty much comes right out of the chest, right? And then in that scene where she's laying there, it's almost coming more like out of her stomach. And it seems
Right.
almost like it's her, which is partly foreshadowing, because we find out in the later movie that she wasn't pregnant all along, right? But in that scene, it almost makes you wonder if this emerging and this birthing, you're talking about, whether the director maybe was highlighting this idea of the birthing process and emerging into the new self, type of thing.
I definitely think so. And I also think, and I mean, Cameron actually points it out himself. He says in a quote, I think some people miss the point. They think she goes to, the planet to fight these aliens, because she'll get her job back. But that's not the case. There's no amount of money that can do that for her. One of his biggest problems in writing the film, was coming up with a reason why she goes back to fight the alien. And it had to be a psychological reason for her. one of the things that interested me, as in Cameron, is that there was a lot of soldiers from Vietnam who had been in intense combat situations who re-enlisted to go back again because they had psychological problems that they had to work out, like an inner demon to be exercised, right? So this is the inner evil that's been planted in us as well. And it's a good metaphor for a character. So he's developing the character because that is the inner evil. She's went through this traumatic experience from the previous movie. And a lot of times when people go through trauma, they can identify with the evil and then it will re-manifest, and it will take over their entire life. They'll either identify with the abuser or the victim, right? So for her, she doesn't really do either. She struggles with it at the beginning of this film, but her going back to fight these aliens is her to allegorically and metaphorically conquering this inner trauma, this PTSD that she has from dealing with evil before. So we have to think of that in our own society. Like, we've dealt with these evils before. We've dealt with tyrannical governments, dictatorships. We've dealt with all these things before. Yes, it's more complex now, and the technology has advanced, and it's more prevalent and widespread than it ever has been. But we've fought these things before, and we have to face our fear. We have to face our fear to conquer the evil. And I think that's one of the allegories of the movie, is to face your trauma, to face the inner turmoil, so that you can go and do something about what's going on. So I really liked what Cameron said about that, because it's also character development. You can't expect to make a good sequel and just repeat the same thing that happened before. You got to show character development. You got to
Yeah,
expand
a
the
lot of them
universe.
try. It never works.
Right, right. It gets so repetitive, and it's like you got to have, Ellen Ripley expand and grow. So the psychological aspect, that's why I'm really interested in that, because he knows that, and he's bringing it to the forefront. Like, hey, this is what's going on.
My other takeaway on that, I really like the way you pointed that out, because that is a good point. The other aspect that pointed out, that popped out for me on her decision, I like how you're saying face your demon. Like, that's a necessary part when we have something going on inside of us in this real world. Until you face it, you never really deal with it. You have to face it head on, no matter how ugly it is, right? But then there was this other thing of the what I think of as this connection to the care principle, where we
Mm.
think about others outside of ourselves. And part of what made her such a good heroine was the fact that as soon as she kind of comes to awake, yeah, I've been out 57 years, and Burke's talking about the situation, she says, wait a second, there's terraformers on the planet? Families? Did you say families? Yes, families of terraformers living on the planet. And that, for her, she's right away really pissed off about that. What do you mean there's families there? And that becomes part of her, I think, maybe part of how he designed her decision to go back, because these people needed help. Would she have wanted to if it was just the Marines going? Maybe not. But the fact that there were families there, and then obviously we know the rest of the story, she makes the connection with Newt, kind of the symbol of her long lost daughter later. But that was her caring about more than just herself. And I think maybe that was why he threw that in. But if not, it's still a good allegorical thing to think about. It's one thing how most of the Marines or most of the characters in these stories are just thinking about what's best for themselves. But someone like Ellen Ripley was thinking about all these other people and these families.
Yeah, I think you're dead on with that. I love that scene. It gives you enough information to know what's going on, like where the movie might go, and it foreshadows what's going to happen in the future. And the allegory of that is true care. And like you said, we see her develop and express dynamic of care as a mother figure. She's a very powerful mother, conscious parent, and she did have a child before, but she had braided from her child for 57 years. Her child had already died, and you only kind of get that information in the director's cut of that. But yeah, she had a child, and her child grew old and died, and made a game based on the child as in isolation, and kind of followed her story, which was interesting. But yeah, it's her motherhood instincts, and she's trying also, to make up for that as well, right? It's like logical. she's trying to make up for the lack of her being present for her own child when she comes to Newt, you know? So when she finds Newt, she's like, I was supposed to be here for my mother or for my child, and I wasn't a good mother for my child because I was, you know, because of these things that happened in my past. You know, whether they were a choice or not, she still feels some type of little bit of guilt for that, right? Because a lot of people do. Doesn't mean she's actually guilty for that because it wasn't really her doing, but because obviously it was an accident that she was floating in space for 57 years, but um, she she's ready to implement that motherhood instinct, and that's why she's so powerful and she's so realistic. She dresses casually. She doesn't dress in these skimpy clothes or anything like that. She's not an unrealistic looking girl. She doesn't have these busty boobs and her, you know, her ass lifted or anything like this, but she said looks good, you know? She's not unrealistic, and she looks like a female that you could settle down with, you know? She looks like a girl that you would want to actually, you know, have a life with in a way, right? And it's really important to understand about her character design. And so I don't think it could have been done uh, like today. If they would have done Ellen Ripley, they would have her super hot supermodel, you know, kick-ass girl that has superpowers or whatever, and it's like,
Tomb Raider,
no.
she'd have lips as big as
Yeah.
sausages.
Right, yeah, so she has believable attributes, you know, she has believable
Yeah,
attributes,
no,
she's
that's a
not
good point. Yeah.
superhuman, you know. She has ingenuity, right? She has these creative, you know, aspects of herself to deal with problems, like I was saying earlier. But yeah, so she goes and you were talking about that scene with Burke. She goes into the business room with all the corporate heads of Wayland Utani, and it's, you know, it's mostly men, but there's female CEOs there and stuff like that. None of them believe her, and it shows the crony capitalistic like corporatism going on, right? It shows that the government and corporations are in bed with each other to that degree, you know, that they control pretty much everything. Hierarchy, and they are completely cold. They are psychopathic. They do not take her seriously whatsoever. It's like us trying to come out and say government is slavery, like look at all this evidence and I'll show you the evidence, and they're like, no, we don't see evidence of that, you know, no way. No, but behind the scenes, Burke, who works for the company, is the company man. He's being, you know, I think personally he's probably being um you know, to get these aliens. I don't think it's just his selfish, you know, goal to do
Oh
that. I
yeah,
think it's
there's
coming
a directive. It was in the first one too. Like it was part of the
right.
directive written in Mother was you were
Yep,
supposed to bring back the species, right? And what
that's
is that
right.
for? Ultimately, it's always for the same thing, for military strength. We want the power that these aliens have, you know, so we can use this power for our own power. And then the other thing they show there, they're completely heartless. Talk about this cold thing, and it's like also what I've heard called the technological or you know, people that are trying to get away from the natural human living things and get into you know, technology and computers and, you know, their technotronic agenda, right? It's one of the
Right,
things that
right.
people have called that. Well, these guys, they're all upset. They're having her tell the story, and she's saying, "My whole crew died here. My whole crew. You know, all these people died, and they could give a shit about who died. They're only concerned with the cost of the ship.
Of the
You know,
ship,
they're
yeah.
saying, well, you just blew up a really expensive piece of equipment." And she's like,
Yeah.
you know, 10 or 12 people died. And they're like, yeah, but that was expensive. You know, it's like,
Yeah, right.
it's like you can see, like you're saying, that psychopathic element. And this whole movie's doing that. It's talking
Yep.
about the I'm having trouble with that word, the
Technocrats.
technocratic agenda
Right.
to move
Right.
people into this cyber age where we're connected to humans. I
Yep.
mean, where humans are connected to robots, which was kind of weird that Ripley winds up in the robot machine fighting the alien. Maybe that's part of that
Right, right.
juxtaposition, you know. Yeah, I think that's an enemy you also see throughout this movie is natural versus unnatural. But I'm curious your take on the aliens. I want to talk a little bit about the aliens
Okay.
and the buggers and
Yeah.
how that hits you.
Yeah, when I was a kid, the
I know we're
aliens.
jumping around a little bit. There's so much.
No. Yeah, there's so much to the movie. I mean, I'd hate to chronologically just go through it on a podcast anyways, because then it's like you might as well just watch the movie and come to my house and I'll just sit down and tell you everything. So, you
Yeah,
know.
maybe we should do that one night. Just play the movie and chat. Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah, that would be funny. That'd be cool, a little review or something.
Watch party.
Um, Watch party. Yep, that's not a bad idea. But yeah, the aliens, the design of the aliens are amazing. I've never seen such a unique design of a horror creature or a creature that is in the realms of horror movies, right? Like we do have like some really unique designs, obviously, but aliens, the alien stands out so much. Even today, I don't see anything that comes close to the design, and it was designed by a couple people, but mainly it was designed by H.R. Giger. And H.R. Giger's work is amazing. I think of H.R. Giger as the dark side of Alex Gray's work. Okay, so think Alex Gray. Do you know who he is? He's the
Oh
guy who,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So think of Alex Gray with his spiritual, bright color, fractal, sacred geometrical designs, and you think of that completely inverted, and then you have this dark psychological, artistic manifestation from H.R. Giger, and he's doing stuff. It's like, it's all sexual stuff. The head of the alien looks like a big penis. It's shaped like a big penis, and then the tongue of the alien that comes out is a hold on a second. I'll come back. So the tongue of the alien that shoots out is also representative of like lizard tongues, or like serpents, and how their tongues are quick, or like a frog catching a fly or something like that. But it's also snake like, right? So it's like a snake. It shoots out and it strikes, right? It strikes at the people. And it's also phallic, right? It's a phallic symbol. It's a penis shooting out of the mouth. And H.R. Giger was not one to hide any of this. If you look at his art, if you buy the Alien book that he put out there, it's like there's penises and vaginas and like all this stuff all over the place within his art. So it's really crazy. Like there's one picture of an alien holding its tail, and it looks like a giant penis. And so there's this whole sexual thing within the alien design, but the way it looks is kind of like it plays off of our fear of like insects and reptiles and things like that in our subconscious, right? So things that we don't quite completely understand in nature. So it has this exoskeleton like an insect would, so it has this bony type of, almost unnatural looking skeleton to it. So when we look at like insects, we see that and it's creepy, right? It kind of throws you off a little bit, at least as a kid, or in your young days. It's like, wow. And we see a lot of design based off of this in horror flicks, or like thrillers, or sci-fi movies, right? We see a lot of things mimicking the serpents and the insects. And the serpents is easy down because the serpents represents low baseness, obviously, right? So the reptile is a representation of low base consciousness, but it also correlates to the R complex of the brain, the reptilian part of the brain. And so in the first movie, the android actually says a pleasurable way, like he says something to the effect that their being has no conscience, it has no morals, it does not care, it's absolutely cold. And what he's explaining is a psychopath. He's literally explaining a psychopath, someone who does not care, who can hide in the shadows, who can be hypnotic, who can blend in with its environment. Because in this whole movie, the whole idea of the alien has this kind of chameleon effect where it can blend into the environment to such a degree that until it's actually looking at you, right? Or like in your face or whatever. So you see that in the set design. So in the sets, the backgrounds and everything are designed specifically so the alien can hide on the walls or in the crevices or anything like that. And that's that idea that a psychopath can be right next to you and you don't know. You have no idea. It could be the person who you just met, it could be a guy that you know for 20 years. You have no idea. They're so good at mimicking being an actual emotional being an empathetic being, that it's hard to distinguish, until you actually see them doing the thing that, you're like, oh, wow, you're torturing animals, you're raping people, you're in child trafficking, whatever it might be, you're doing ritualistic sacrifices, so it's like that's how I kind of look at that. But I love the alien design. It's and another thing that H.R. Giger did was apply like this technological aspect to it. So it's not just sexual. He in his art he has this idea of biomechanics where the beings are contorted and merged together with machines where you can't tell the difference between the two, you know so it's really interesting. So it's kind of this transhumanistic idea, but it's kind of, to me, it's implying that the lower based consciousness will completely merge with machine at that level, because machines are cold, mechanical, calculating. They don't really care about human life. There is no care there. There's no higher levels of empathy. There's no higher levels of thinking from the neocortex or the limbic system of the brain, the limbic system of the. So yeah, I think that's a really good allegory and metaphor
Thanks,
about
Ed.
how.
Transhumanism was the term I was really trying to come up with. You nailed it. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
the theme there. Yeah. Um, and then the other thing that really sticks out for me on that was those the design of the aliens is their method of attack. Where they it's every time when people discover them, they seem very innocent, right? On the surface, everything seems fine. It just looks like this room full of eggs, right? And then all of a sudden, you know, someone comes back to the ship and they got this thing stuck on their face, right? Well, when we do some wrongs, like a lie is a good example. The first time someone tells a lie, it's kind of a subtle thing. It can almost be missed. But then you keep going with that lie, and it grows into a bigger and bigger problem right inside of you. It comes out. You can't hide it. Eventually it pops out. The evil comes out of you. So it's almost, to
Right.
me, their design itself and the way they go about capturing people, and then like when they realize in the movie they're not dead yet, their life signs are weak, but they're still alive, right? Because aliens don't kill you right away; they just take you back, and at this point, you're like a slave, you're like a zombie, right? They own you, yeah, and you're becoming them. You're actually their castle now, and so that's kind of like the evil in our society, where you become a minion of the government, or you decide to let your soul die and become a soul dyer. You give up yourself to this evil entity, which is happy to just take you over and grow its own children inside of you and use you as a shell, and you're just a zombie slave. Wow. you know
Absolutely, yeah. That's dead on. That is absolutely dead on, Chris. I love. Right. See, that's what I loved what you put out there, because you the importance of the allegory within the idea of the evil within. So I mean, I don't think it could be any more blunt, that it is talking about an evil that's coming from within each of us that can be planted into individuals, so easily and so innocently. So yeah, I really love that breakdown that you just gave.
and then how dangerous it is too, right? Like how quickly it gets out of hand, right? And that's the truth of it too. Things really go south quick once people start doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, it spreads and multiplies like wildfire. It goes
Yeah.
nuts. It's a mind virus. But it is interesting. I was just thinking about this. It is interesting that the being gets planted in the stomach, right? In the guts where the courage is. And it's like the death of courage in a way, because it bursts out of your guts and in your stomach area. So I don't know. I just thought of that.
You
Like
lose
I
your
think,
guts,
yeah, you lose your guts, you lose your ability to do
lose
what
your
is
will.
right. Yeah. You lose your will. You literally become a slave to it. So yeah, I mean, I think I got some notes here on the design as well. Yeah, I do. I really like. the baby alien, when it hatches, since we're talking about that, and it busts through the chest burster, right? Which usually is the chest rather than the stomach, but we do see at some levels this bursting of the stomach sometimes, and at the beginning you see it like coming out of the stomach a little bit. But the teeth on the alien, right? If you go back to the first movie, or you can look at it in this movie too, the teeth on all the aliens are metal, they're metallic, right? So I felt that that was kind of interesting because it gives us the idea of something unnatural as well, because you don't ever see that in nature, right? You don't see a being with metallic teeth unless you're talking about like Jaws from James Bond or whatever, where he has the big metallic teeth, right? um, so that's
Not
kind of like what
natural.
HR. Yeah, natural, right? I mean, I guess you do see some people with implants with metal teeth nowadays, right? But yeah, it's not a natural thing,
Again, not
and
natural.
yeah,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah, you
right,
nailed it.
absolutely, yeah. So, and the aliens obviously have this whole thing about being a predator, right? So, but it's also a sexual predator. So the face huggers, right? So they happen to sexually rape an individual because they jump, they restrain you, they probably paralyze you in some way, they choke you out, and they supposedly, if you look into it, they have some kind of
Just stick
secretion
this
that, yeah, they
thing down
stick
your
stick the throat, and that's an oral rape, and you get impregnated, and it doesn't matter if you're male or female. So it kind of has this weird kind of uh, trans organ thing going on. So it's really strange, with that. But the face hugger itself is like a spider. It has eight legs. It has like a snake tail or a serpent's tail, right? And then if you look at the bottom of it, where the tube comes out, it looks like a vagina, and then it's a tube coming out, So it's kind of transsexual in a way. It has both sexes there, or androgynous. Or you could call it androgynous if you wanted to call it that way. So I thought that was kind of interesting that you have this between the sexes with these creatures as well. I think that's you know, kind of symbolic in a way, obviously. Yeah, it's kind
Yeah,
of
well, we see that same, theme happening in the
happening in
public
our
sector,
world.
where this whole trans thing is being pushed like an agenda.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Another thing I liked about the design of the aliens is it has no eyes, right? And that's all to give you this idea that it's not of nature, because we always look at things with eyes and we feel connected to them. There's a intimate relationship between beings that connect through visual stimuli. So when they designed it, first H.R. Giger did have like alien bug eyes on it, these big black bulges, but he decided to take them off and just make it black, like a cap all the way back. And there are eyes underneath that cap, but you can't see them. And the point of that is that you can't see the eyes of you can't look into the whites of your eyes of your enemy or anything like that. And what it does is it creates this uneaction with you, because you can't relate that being. There is no relating thing, because it's so separate from you that it is, just completely lost all of its humanity, pretty much. It doesn't have a humanoid. It does have a humanoid body, but the face, we rely upon the face a lot, especially the eyes. So I really like that because it gives you this sense of terror, because you can't look into the eyes of this being, and to me it's like when you look into the eyes of a psychopath, or dark occultist or somebody like this, they're just black, they're just absent, it's like there's nothing there, you know it's like they don't have eyes. So I think that's kind of a little bit of a metaphor for that in a way.
Yeah, interesting too. Or for me, when I was really working on my original Aliens little allegorical presentation, was right after the whole pandemic started, and I was really particularly frustrated with the masks. And one of the things I really don't like about people wearing masks is it does just that, like you're describing to people. It makes us like aliens to
Yep.
one another. Children can't distinguish facial expressions and this type of thing. And I'll have to, maybe I'll flash it on the screen for my edit here. The picture I made of all organic masks showing somebody wearing, one of those face huggers. I'm like, hey, there's a good solution. Just sort of a
That's so
mean, a
true.
mean joke, but
Yeah.
it's what it reminded me of when I started seeing this. People like, you're putting something really dangerous on your face and calling that safe. That's not a good idea. Uh,
Yeah.
it's just silly. But yeah, I mean,
That's
to me,
an
it was
interesting
really,
correlation.
it was sticking out too. That whole thing of like, don't let people on the ship that are, contaminated. This whole idea of that everybody's contaminated now. We don't know who's contaminated, so everybody's our enemy. And this same thing that kind of pops up in zombie movies or contagious movies, where they're trying to convince you of this fear that you don't know who you can trust. Anyone could be an alien at any moment. And that is the same kind of divisive, Hegelian dialectic stuff we see going on in the media, where they're trying to convince us that everybody's our enemy, and that our neighbor could be the alien could be inside of you, and therefore you shouldn't go to your grandma's house because you might be the disease. You might be the evil.
Absolutely. That's right. You got that right. Yeah, it
So
kind
stay
of
6 feet
breeds
away from everyone.
it breeds in this idea of witch hunting, right? And like heretic hunting, right? So you have to, you get all in caught up in this fervor with people, and then you're gonna ostracize everybody who potentially could be that evil. Anybody who potentially could have that seed of evil within them without any evidence, without any proof, without any substantial due process or anything like this. So everybody's your enemy, and that divides us, right? Everybody is your enemy. If you have that mindset, you're paranoid beyond belief, and it actually creates more division than you could ever imagine. It is a direct divide between you and other people. So it's pretty it's pretty interesting, and I like that correlation to the face hugger being the mask. It does look like a big old mask. So I think that's
I'll
kind of
have to
funny.
post that picture again. It says, "Look,
Yeah.
all new organic masks."
That's great. That's super great.
But
Um,
yeah, I mean, maybe we can keep going on this aliens thing, or do the watch party, or make another video in the future. But I think we should probably kind of close this up. And I want to tell people about where to find all your work, and where to read. I want anybody who's interested in aliens or who's enjoying this conversation, go check out onegreatworknetwork.com, and Brandon Martin's work, Aliens and Esoteric Allegorical Film Analysis, Part 1. He's working on Part 2. Maybe Part 2 will give us another impetus to do another breakdown of this. There's so much more to cover. We barely scratched the surface. But what else did you want to shout out, Brandon? Looking forward to your presentation at Funnel 2. And yeah, whatever else you want to talk about, Cubbyhole.
yeah, I mean, you can find my work, like you said, at One Great Work Network. You can also find my work at truth.com. And I have a presentation coming out for Funnel 2, which is a great conference called Convergence. Really amazing, top of the line, top caliber speakers. People should check that out. And yeah, I look forward to coming back on. I think we could probably cover the next half in another hour. So I'm pretty sure we could get that done. That would be awesome to come back on and talk about those topics.
Let's do it. Yeah,
All
excellent.
right.
Right on. Cool. Well, do you have any other closing comments before we cut out, or to be
No, I'd say that's
continued?
good. Yeah, to be continued. Yeah,
Right on. Hey, thanks
right
so
on.
much, Brandon. Oh, great show. Thanks, folks, for listening. Go home and watch Aliens and read up, and we'll pick it up. We'll pick it up for part